gather to remember and to celebrate the life of Rick Ponomar. Of course, our lives are so much poorer for his loss, and it's appropriate that we spend some time together today to grieve and to mourn. But on the other hand, our sorrow is mixed with thanksgiving and celebration, because we know that our lives have been so much richer because of what Rick has meant to each one of us. There are times in our lives when we're given the chance to pause and reflect upon what life means and who we are and how we can live our lives well. This is one of those moments as we gather to remember and to celebrate Rick's life. We can celebrate, remember, give thanks for all he meant to us. We can think about those amazing qualities he exemplified and reflect on how we can make them part of our lives. We can tell stories and smile and laugh and remember the ways in which he made our lives so much better. We can keep his memory alive as we reflect on what Rick meant to us and modeled for us, and make those wonderful qualities parts of our lives as well. On behalf of the family, I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and also for those who visited Rick when he was in hospital or struggling over the last while. Thank you for just your care and your compassion and your friendship over these past months. This time I'm going to invite Dwight Jones to come and share some of his memories and thoughts on Rick and his impact on his life.
To get a little bit lower here, a lot lower. Rick would be stoked to see a number of people here this morning. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about Rick's association with astronomy, and it's essentially a history of the Astronomy Society at the same time as a record of Rick's association with the astronomy and all the stuff that he's done for our local society. And since his first involvement, I'd say about mid-'80s, about 40 years ago, our society's evolved into one of the best amateur facilities in Canada, and we've had amateurs from other areas of the country come and visit, and they're quite jealous of what we've developed here in Lethbridge. And Rick was instrumental in that progression, which it just started off as a small sort of grassroots bunch of keen stargazers, and we met at that time at the Helen Schuler Center down in the Coolies. And now we have a facility in Popson Park that, it's a growing group of now 70 people with our state-of-the-art equipment, and we've done a lot of work with the University of Lethbridge, and I think David Naylor is here today. Dr. David Naylor, from the professor of the University of Lethbridge Physics and Astronomy Department, who has worked closely with us over the years. We've done labs for the students and all kinds of associated work together, which really keeps our interest and our excitement going about the universe and science. So how it all started was back in the mid-'80s. Paul Jones, right over there, sitting right there. If you want to stand up, Paul, and we'll be mentioning Paul in several events through the years. Paul and I and Rick were the three musketeers of astronomy back in the day. Back in the mid-'80s, Paul was taking his pictures to the Slide Shop, which was a photo shop at that time. I know a lot of those have disappeared now, but digital photography's taken over. But the owner told Paul about another fellow that was bringing in pictures of the stars, and he gave Paul his phone number, and that phone number, of course, was Rick's phone number. So Paul called him and suggested that Rick come to the meeting of our society, or of our club at that time. And it didn't take much arm twisting for Rick to come to the meeting. And he came down there and he brought a binder of photos, which he was really unsure about what we think of his photos. Everyone thinks their own photos are not very good, but Paul and I were suitably impressed, and that was just the beginning of Rick's long, incredible journey with astronomy and our group. He worked a lot to develop us into a society, which started in 1991. We were incorporated as a society under the Societies Act, and we ended up getting the facility in Popson Park thanks to some generous people at the city of Lethbridge, and we had a 25-year lease. We had to do a lot of work getting everything ready to get the facility ready for us to move into. Rick was very enthusiastic about this. And that, of course, enthusiasm wore off on everybody else. And during that time, it wasn't just all work. There was a lot of pleasure going to star parties, and star parties is kind of like a nerd convention. All the people that in Alberta and Saskatchewan and so forth gather at these campgrounds and so forth to gaze at the stars and take photos and trade stories and look at photos and so forth. And we attended quite a few of those with Rick, Paul, and I, and sometimes just Paul and Rick, or sometimes just Rick and I. A couple of them was at Brooks Dinosaur Park, where we got, during the daytime, to visit the dinosaur displays, and at nighttime take advantage of the nice skies that they had there. Kinderbrook Island was another one by Brooks. And of course, our crowning glory was in 1989 when we had the Rocky Mountain High Star Party in Waterton, at Waterton Lakes. And we had some great speakers there. Terry Dickinson, a well-known author who unfortunately has just passed away, and Alan Dyer. They just come out with a book on amateur astronomy, and it was great to have them there. We had a great display of northern lights, a very nice Perseid meteor shower, and everything seemed to come together all at once. It was just a great time. And we did another one in 1991. And we went to some star parties up on this mountain by Soyuz called Mount Cobol, which is a mountain about 7,000 feet, and there's a road that goes up top. The road was built in '67, ostensibly for the Queen Elizabeth telescope, which the government was going to put up there, and they were testing the site as a good telescope site. And eventually that project was scrapped, and it went to the Canada-France-Hawaii telescope, and of course in Hawaii. Anyway, we know that that's a really good site, so we went up there in 1990, and I'm going to talk about some of the events that Rick and Paul and I got up to while we were there. Unfortunately, it was plagued by clouds and rain and even snow in August. In fact, it snowed so hard one time that they had to stop the talks because the snow hitting the tent, we couldn't hear the speaker. So obviously there was not a clear sky, so that meant we got up to some other things, such as there was an outdoor biffy that was built when they were testing the site, and that was dug so deep, I think I heard Chinese. Anyway, it had a lock on the outside and on the inside, and Paul and I noticed that, and Rick had to go to the bathroom just as everybody was falling down to hear the talks from the guest speakers. So we locked Rick in the biffy and started throwing big rocks at it, and it made a big noise, and Rick thought he was hit by lightning and was screaming for help. And our stomachs hurt throughout the whole trip with laughter, and there may have been some alcohol involved, although I'm not sure. Through the 90s and beyond, Rick had a vision, and he held every position on the Society's executive, and actually he's had several positions several times over. We have a small executive, and at that time it was quite a small club, so he was president and vice president and secretary and treasurer and all those kinds of things. He also did a lot of volunteering at bingos, casinos, because that's what keeps our society afloat, is those kind of activities, and some other fundraising activities as well. We used to do labs initially at the University Observatory, and that involved us being there probably once a week or so to work with the students. Through that time, Rick brought credibility to our society, and our amateur astronomers in the society would establish a very good working relationship with Dr. Naylor at the University of Lethbridge. And Rick highly valued that as they worked together to develop astronomy courses for the student and the labs that we did. It was been countless labs over the years, because I believe we started that in the early 90s. And in honor of Rick today, the university's flag has been lowered to half-mast, so that says something about his involvement and how he's valued by that work. And we had a lot of work in terms of building the place. Rick had a keen business sense and a lot of contacts with people. We had to do a lot of work to procure grant money, work with local politicians at the local and provincial level, and all of that came to fruition when we were able to buy an observatory from a fellow in Banff who had an observatory on the top of his garage. The locals there complained that his observatory blocked their view of the mountains, so he had to remove it. The town of Banff told him he had to take it off, so we were more than happy to take his dome and telescope and a lot of other accessories. And we had a base built ahead of time at our site, and Rick arranged, of course, to have a truck go up and pick up the observatory and all the equipment and bring it back and have it installed in that base. Of course, there was tons of gravel and a lot of heavy equipment, generously donated by Rick and MP Crushing. Later, in 2000, a support building was added to the observatory, and that was named in Rick's honor. And you'll see the plaque over here on the right side under Rick's picture there to acknowledge the extensive contributions Rick's made to the society. And I believe our society we're talking about right now, we're going to rededicate that and have it to Rick Ponomar Memorial Astronomy Laboratory. And I think I don't think we're going to take a lot of arm twisting to have our members decide that that's a great idea. And as our hobby evolved, computers became a bigger part of amateur astronomy, and of course Rick was really into computers and had a lot of knowledge in that, and he essentially assembled the computers that we use at our facility, and still to this day are still using some that Rick has put together for us. During that time, of course, Rick had to make many calls to various developers, Meade Instruments and so forth, because in the early days, this was early 90s, nobody had this kind of technology except our club and professional observatories. So Rick was our go-to guy for computer updates, program installations, all these kind of things to get everything working together. We had a computer to add to interface with a telescope mount, and that enabled us to essentially, on a computer screen, click on an object with the mouse, and the computer would guide the telescope there, and we look in the telescope, and there's the object right there. So we didn't have to do all this searching and so forth. So it just made our observing much, much easier. And of course, Rick also had a deep personal interest in astronomy, and not just all the other things that go around with sort of the business part of it, but observing. And we used to go out taking astrophotos at least weekly, sometimes more than that, when our wives and weather permitted. And in the old days of taking film, it was really difficult to take a time exposure. You had to stand there freezing to death usually, watching a star in a crosshair eyepiece and trying to keep that star centered with motor controls. And we would time our pictures by songs on the radio, so an average picture would be 3 songs and a long one would be 5. We're, pretty bare bones at that time. And Rick was, Paul and I would often tease Rick about his almost endless pursuit of the perfect picture of the North American nebula. And he's got one displayed up here. I think he finally got that done. All kidding aside, though, Rick was an avid, skilled astrophotographer, and if you see some examples of his work, which I believe there are some in the folder, and so forth, you see that he was serious about those kinds of things. And although Rick's health began to affect the amount of time he spent with Paul and I on pursuing our passion of astronomy, we shared in the most memorable astronomical events and had extremely rare observations with him. For instance, seeing the central star in the Ring Nebula. A lot of people don't even know what the Ring Nebula is, but seeing the central star, which is the progenitor star of the nebula, is a rare sight indeed. And Rick and I were together the first time we saw it. And I've only seen this 3 times in my life, so to have together with Rick to see that was something else. And also the transit of Venus across the face of the sun in 2012, also another rare event. We had 2 of them in 2004 and 2012, and they're not going to occur for another 160 some years or so. So it's going to be, that's a once in a lifetime event. And finally, the peak of it was the total solar eclipse that Rick and I traveled to in Wyoming in 2017, and to see that was also a peak experience in my life, and also in Rick's. And we talked about that frequently, what a great time that was. And we had a lot of people stop by. We had at least 70 or 80 people stop by and look through our equipment. We came well prepared, and there was about 30,000 people at the site that we sat out in Casper, Wyoming. Rick had a wide range of work, and sharing his multifaceted experience continued until he had some health challenges starting in 2018. And while we were at going to the eclipse, Rick had just had his dentures, and they were giving him all kinds of trouble. So he didn't have a lot of comfortable time when we were in Wyoming looking at the eclipse, although all of that disappeared when we saw the totality start. And Rick has gradually just handed the torch over to other capable members that we can continue to preserve Rick's legacy and commitment, leadership and involvement, and making Lethbridge Astronomy Society even better than today, and that's been quite the journey. In closing, I'm just going to share one more experience. This is early on when Paul and I and Rick first got together. Shortly after Rick joined the club, he told us he had a certain eyepiece that he couldn't get to focus in his telescope. So Paul and I came over to his house to see if we could help him out with that. And we showed up with a hacksaw in our hand, and we took his telescope mirror out the telescope, and then we started sawing up his shiny new red tube with the hacksaw. Rick was quite concerned and went upstairs to tell Wendy about what we're doing. She said, she hoped that we knew what we were doing. And we did, and the problem was solved. But anyway, shortly after that, Rick bought himself a brand new Meade 8-inch telescope, and away we went down the I need this accessory rabbit hole. And that, of course, continues for all of us today. We shared merry experiences, laughs, and friendships, and that transcended the society and amateur astronomy. And I hope wherever Rick is, he's got clear skies tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dwight. We appreciate that. This time I'm going to invite Rick's sisters-in-law, Wendy's sisters, Lois and Barb and Joanne, to come and to share.
Hi. I'm glad that you could all make it and bid farewell to our special relative and friend, Rick. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lois, Rick's sister-in-law, and these are my two wonderful sisters, Barb and Joanne. And Rick considered us to be sisters, and we are very proud and thankful to be Wendy's sister and Rick's sisters-in-law. If I get carried away, I must warn you that I have a wacky sense of humor like Rick. My personal journey with Rick actually began in about 1981 when all his sisters and spouses went to Great Falls together for a weekend. We had a great time, and Rick was the life of the party. At one point, he called over the waitress and asked her if she wanted a tip. She stood there eagerly waiting while Rick said, "Don't paint a red car blue." We were all a little miffed and shocked. When we realized that this was Rick's tip to her, we all broke out laughing. Wendy was not impressed at all. This has been a standing joke of ours for years, and it still comes to mind quite often. And back around this same time, my sister Barb's husband decided to get his hair permed. My husband and Joanne's husband followed suit. They all thought they looked just wonderful. The jury's still out on this one. So not to be outdone, Rick permed his hair too. Well, who would have ever thought that Rick had such a thick head of hair? He came out with this great big curly ball on the top of his head and looked like Bozo the Clown. Although they all looked pretty funny, Rick took the cake. We all had a pretty good laugh over that one. In 2015, when I was going through some very difficult times, Rick and Wendy took me into their home and helped me. I cannot thank them both enough. Rick was welcoming and supportive, as were all his kids. After a short while, I almost felt like one of Rick's kids. He wanted to know where I was every minute of the day. I even had to leave him with departure and arrival times whenever I went out of town. But during the years that I lived with Rick, we had many long conversations, listening to and supporting each other. I don't remember him ever getting upset with me. He was always understanding and encouraging. However, sometimes Rick did feel a little outnumbered with two women against poor little old Rick. But for the most part, he really enjoyed my stay, and when he had his joint surgeries, he had two people to wait on him instead of one. When Rick took Wendy and me to his astronomy Christmas party, he introduced me as his sister wife. I thought that was pretty funny, and then the name just seemed to stick. He used to call me this periodically and joke that it was nice to have more than one wife. Rick loved older music and had great taste. He sometimes picked out different songs for Wendy and me to listen to while we played cards. Not that we played cards very much. However, my favorite was when he played the piano. My, could he play. He played by ear, and it sounded so wonderful. He could never play long enough for me. Rick loved history. If you asked Rick anything about history, you better settle in, because you were bound to be there for a while with his abundance of information. His knowledge and retention of historical facts was phenomenal. Even through his illness, Rick retained his sense of humor. As his hair fell out, he put on my wig just to get a rise out of his kids. Rick and Wendy raised great kids who embraced me as well as my sisters. I love them all very much and have been happy to share more in their lives. Wendy, Danny, Victoria, Eric, Tina, and Rick's mom, Stephanie, spent a tremendous amount of time with Rick as he traveled through this journey this past year. My sisters and I were able to chip in and spend hours with Rick as well. In the last few weeks, there was always someone with Rick. Rick will always be remembered for his humor and his love and loyalty to his family and friends. He will live on in our hearts forever and never be forgotten. Rest in peace, Rick. We love you.
Thank you for that. And again, the family would like to thank all of you who visited and cared and supported them and Rick over the past year. It was very much appreciated. And thanks to you'll notice that there are some honorary pallbearers, Danny and Eric and Ray and Spencer and Jackson and Dwight, Paul and Lloyd, and we also want to make sure that Colin Hogan is added to that list as well. As I met with the family this past Monday and got to know Rick a little bit, some of the stories you may not have heard, some of you, or they told a lot of stories about his childhood. It was an interesting childhood. There's stories of painting two cats green with green oil paint, trying to wash them in the ditch afterwards, starting the lawn of the McGrath Hospital on fire. Tina, his sister, recalls the time that Rick found the X-Lax and shared it with her, being a very kind brother. They enjoyed eating it, but not so much the effects that it had later on. Rick had more of it than she did. And then Wendy adds, need I say more? Rick's grandma and grandpa and Auntie Rose were babysitting him when he found some Chanel No. 5 perfume and drank it because it smelled so good. There seems to be a theme coming out here. He smelled of Chanel No. 5 for days afterwards. The grandparents were also babysitting another time when Rick took his grandfather's watch apart to see how it worked, and then no one could put it back together again. It sounds like later on when he got into the Astronomical Society, he kind of figured out how to put stuff together, which is probably a good thing given his track record early on. With these experiences babysitting, we were told that his grandparents were almost shaking in their boots whenever asked to babysit him after that. The family can probably tell you some more interesting stories. I'm sure he loved to tell them. He did have an amazing sense of humor. He made up lyrics to songs, which is a long and noble tradition that I can resonate with. He kept his goofy disposition to the end. I loved your stories about the 80s hair perms, being just old enough to remember some of those things. I can picture that. Apparently, perms for men are coming back. So guys, if you want to relive that, you can. There's an interesting story or two about driving too fast on gravel roads, but I'll leave that for the family to talk about. He loved his coffee with no lid. So apparently there are coffee stains in a lot of places. He loved sports. In his youth, he played basketball and golf. He coached his kids in baseball. Loved camping and fishing, particularly at Police Lake. And of course, he loved astronomy and the Astronomical Society. I'm a morning person, not a night person, so it's something that I would love to see the stars in the middle of the night, but it's probably not going to happen. So wonderful that Rick really enjoyed that. I did have the opportunity a few times to visit a couple of observatories in the middle of the night, and I remember being very cold and very bored and kind of falling asleep. So good on you guys for being able to cope with all of that. That's awesome. Star parties. I've never heard of star parties as a nerd convention before, but that's great. He, of course, loved history. He loved science. He loved crime drama. He loved teasing people. You never knew when he was kidding or when he was really telling the truth. He loved music, in particular, as Lois mentioned, playing the piano. As you noticed from the playlist in the service today, he loved his 60s, 70s rock and roll. He loved pickled herring, which some of the family struggled with a little bit, but that's okay. It's good for him. More for him. Loved animals. It was always bringing back strays that needed a home. He made an incredible impression on the staff in the hospital and Adaptacare and other places he stayed over the past year or so. He always greeted you with a smile and made you feel welcome and glad you came. Most of all, of course, he loved his friends and his family. He was very sentimental about things like cards on Father's Day, and certainly his kids, his grandkids, Wendy, were the center of his life. As we reflect on all that Rick meant to each one of us, and I'm sure as there's an opportunity in a few moments to meet with one another and talk, we can share more stories about the ways in which he impacted our lives. It's good to tell those stories, to keep the memories alive, to celebrate and to laugh and to reflect with joy and thanksgiving for a wonderful life well lived. And my encouragement is that we all take the best that we saw in Rick and make those things part of our lives so that his memory stays alive in us as we see those qualities that he modeled so brilliantly for us and make them part of who we are as well. Let's just take a moment, and the family asked if I'd lead in a very short prayer, and I'm happy to do that, but we'll just take a moment of silence first and invite you to reflect on your own memories of Rick. If you would like to pray silently, you're welcome to do that, and then I'll lead us in a short prayer. Let's just pause. Our God, thank you for the gift of Rick and for all that he meant to each one of us. Help us to keep his memory alive as we reflect on those things that mean so much about who he was in our lives, and help us to make those part of who we are. The heavens declare the glory of God, and so as we reflect on the wonders of the natural world around us, we're reminded that all of this glory reflects your glory as well. Lord, make us an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope, and where there is darkness, light, where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console others, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love others. For it is in giving that we receive, it's in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it's in dying that we're born to eternal life. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. God, thank you for the gift of Rick. May his memory, may his life live on within each one of us, this day and all days. Amen.
Just yesterday morning, they let me know you were gone. Suzanne, the plans they made put an end to you. I walked out this morning and I wrote down this song. I just can't remember who to send it to. I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've seen sunny days that I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend. But I always thought that I'd see you again. Won't you look down upon me, Jesus? You gotta help me make a stand. Just got to see me through another day. My body's aching and my time is at hand. I won't make it any other way. Whoa, I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've seen sunny days that I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend. But I always thought that I'd see you again. Been walking my mind to an easy time, my back turned towards the sun. Lord knows when the cold wind blows, it'll turn your head around. Well, there's hours of time on the telephone line to talk about things to come. Sweet dreams and flying machines in pieces on the ground. Whoa, I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've seen sunny days that I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when I could not find a friend. But I always thought that I'd see you, baby, one more time again now. Thought I'd see you one more time again. There's just a few things coming my way this time around now. Thought I'd see you, thought I'd see you.
Light the fire. You place the flowers in the vase that you bought today. Staring at the fire for hours and hours while I listen to you play your love songs all night long. For me, only for me. Come to me now and rest your head for just 5 minutes. Everything is done. so hard. Now everything is easy 'cause of you. And now, la 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 la. Life used to be so hard. Now everything is easy 'cause of you. And now I'll light the fire while you place the flowers in the vase that you bought today.
Baby, I'ma want you. Baby, I'ma need you. You're the only one I care enough to hurt about. Maybe I'm a crazy, but I just can't live without your loving and affection, giving me direction, like a guiding light to help me through my darkest hour. Lately I'm a praying that you'll always be a staying beside me. Used to be my life was just emotions passing by, feeling all the while I never really knowing why. Lately I'm a praying that you'll always be a staying beside me. Used to be my life was just emotions passing by. Then you came along and made me laugh and made me cry. You taught me why. Baby, I'ma want you. Baby, I'ma need you. Oh, it took so long to find you, baby. Baby, I'ma want you. Baby, I'ma need you.
The man of the wild.
This video clip?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Turn it off.
section that will be here at the front of this room. So, and just wait a couple of moments, and then you'll have an opportunity to meet with the family and share some of the stories with one another as well. Please stand. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. The rains fall soft upon your fields. May the stars always light your darkness. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Amen.